Jake Morrison walked slowly through the glass doors of Riverside Community College. His right arm felt heavy today. The doctor said the metal parts inside it would always ache when it rained. Jake looked up at the dark clouds above and sighed. It was going to be a long day. At 24 years old, Jake looked older than most college students. His face had lines that came from seeing too much. His eyes moved constantly, checking corners and exits. Old habits from the war were hard to break. The other students around him laughed and talked about parties and tests. They looked so young to him. So safe. Jake found his first class and sat in the back corner. He always sat where he could see the door. Professor Lisa Grant was writing on the board about something called galactic politics. Jake almost smiled. If only she knew what galactic politics really looked like when alien ships were shooting at you. Loud voice behind him made Jake turn around. A kid with blonde hair and expensive clothes was talking to his friends. His name tag said Brad Collins. He looked like he had never worried about anything serious in his life. "This class is so boring," Brad said. "I mean, who cares about space? Politics? It's all made up anyway. The government just wants us to think aliens are dangerous so they can spend money on the military." Jake turned back to face the front. He had heard this kind of talk before. People who had never left Earth always thought they knew everything about space. They read news articles and watched movies and thought that made them experts. Professor Grant started talking about the recent war with the Zephyrian Collective. She read from her textbook about how humanity had won against impossible odds. The students looked bored. To them, it was just history, ancient news from 2 years ago. The war ended when human forces destroyed the main Zephyrian fleet at a place called Kepler 442b, Professor Grant said. Military records say it was one of the greatest victories in human history. Brad raised his hand. "Professor, don't you think most of those war stories are fake? I mean, how could humans really beat aliens with better technology? It sounds like propaganda to me." Several students nodded. Jake felt his metal fingers tighten into a fist under his desk. He remembered Kepler 442b very well. He remembered the screaming of his friends as Zephyrian plasma bolts tore through their ships. He remembered being alone in space with a broken fighter craft and no way home. He remembered ramming his damaged ship into the side of an alien dreadnought because he had nothing left to lose. "The official reports are classified," Professor Grant said. "But I think we can trust our military leaders to tell us the truth about these things." "Come on," Brad said with a laugh. "Everyone knows the military lies about everything. It probably made up half those battles to make themselves look good." Jake wanted to stand up and tell Brad exactly what those battles had really been like. He wanted to show him the scars on his chest where Zephyrian claws had almost killed him. He wanted to explain how it felt to watch 3 human colonies burn while you were too far away to help. But Jake said nothing. He had come to college to forget about the war, not to relive it. His therapist had told him that civilian life would be good for him. Learning normal things with normal people would help him heal. So far, it was not working very well. After class, Jake walked to the cafeteria. He bought a sandwich and found an empty table. He was eating quietly when Amy Chun sat down across from him. She was his lab partner in xenobiology class. Amy was smart and usually nice, but she had strange ideas about aliens. "Hey Jake," Amy said. "I was thinking about our project on alien biology. Do you want to meet at the library later?" "Sure," Jake said. He liked Amy, even though she sometimes said things that made him want to laugh or cry. "I've been reading about Zephyrian anatomy," Amy continued. "It's so interesting how they evolved. Did you know their armor is actually part of their skin? It grows naturally as they get older." Jake nearly choked on his sandwich. He knew more about Zephyrian biology than anyone on Earth wanted to know. He had studied their weak points for months during the war. He knew exactly where to shoot to kill them quickly and cleanly. "That's interesting," Jake said carefully. "I wish I could see a real Zephyrian," Amy said with excitement. "I mean, they're probably all gone now, but it would be amazing to study one up close. I bet the textbooks don't tell us everything about them." Jake looked at Amy's excited face and felt sad. She thought of aliens as interesting creatures to study. She had never seen what they could do to humans when they were angry. She had never smelled the burning cities they left behind. "Maybe it's better that they're gone," Jake said quietly. Amy looked surprised. "Why would you say that?" "Think of all the things we could learn from them. Their technology, their culture, their biology. It's such a loss for science." Jake finished his sandwich and stood up. "I'll see you at the library," he said. The rest of the day went the same way. In every class, students and teachers talked about the war like it was something from a movie. They debated whether the battles were real. They wondered what alien technology might be like. They treated the whole thing like an interesting puzzle to solve. Jake went home to his small apartment and sat on his couch. He looked at the box in his closet that held his military medals. The Solar Cross was in there, along with his Purple Heart and Combat Action ribbon. He could prove to everyone that he had been there. He could show them his service record and his medical files. But what would be the point? These people didn't want to know the truth about war. They wanted to believe. It was glorious and exciting. They wanted to think humans were naturally brave and aliens were interesting creatures to study. Jake had learned that most people preferred comfortable lies to difficult truths, so he would keep his secrets and try to be a normal student. He would let Brad Collins think the war was fake. He would let Amy Chun dream about studying alien biology. He would let Professor Grant teach her sanitized version of galactic politics. Maybe someday he would tell them what it was really like out there in the dark between the stars. Maybe someday they would be ready to hear about the things that still gave him nightmares, but not today. Today he was just another college student trying to pass his classes and build a normal life. The war was over, the aliens were gone, and Earth was safe. At least, that's what everyone believed. 3 weeks had passed since Jake started at Riverside Community College. Every day was the same. Students would make jokes about the war. Teachers would read from textbooks that got everything wrong. Jake would sit quietly and try not to think about the friends he had lost. It was Tuesday morning in Professor Grant's Galactic Politics class. She was talking about peace treaties and diplomatic relations. Jake stared out the window and remembered the last time he had seen diplomacy in action. The Zephyrian ambassador had been speaking about peace right up until the moment his ships opened fire on the colony below. Brad Collins was in his usual seat, making his usual comments. Today he was explaining to everyone why humans could never really beat aliens in space combat. "Think about it logically," Brad said to the girl next to him. "Aliens have been traveling between stars for thousands of years. We just figured out how to leave Earth like 50 years ago. There's no way we could beat them in a real fight." Jake's metal fingers drummed silently on his desk. Brad had no idea what he was talking about. Alien technology was better in some ways, but they had weaknesses too. They relied too much on their computers. They couldn't adapt quickly when their plans went wrong. They had never learned to fight with nothing but determination and rage. The military probably just scared them away, Brad continued. Or maybe the aliens got bored and left on their own. I bet if they really wanted to destroy us, we couldn't stop them. Amy Chun nodded from across the room. Brad's right. I've been reading about alien biology, and they're so much more advanced than us. Their natural armor, their enhanced strength, their faster reflexes. A human soldier wouldn't stand a chance against one of them. Jake almost laughed. He had killed dozens of Zephyrians in hand-to-hand combat. Their armor was strong, but it had gaps at the joints. Their reflexes were fast, but they were programmed for specific responses. When you did something unexpected, they froze for just a second. That second was usually enough. Professor Grant tried to restore order. Now, let's not speculate too much about military capabilities. The important thing is that the war is over and both sides are committed to peace. Peace only lasts as long as both sides want it, Jake said quietly. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at him. Jake realized he had spoken out loud without meaning to. "What did you say, Jake?" Professor Grant asked. Jake felt his face turn red. "Nothing, sorry," Brad laughed. "Oh, here we go again. Let me guess, you're going to tell us more stories about your imaginary military service?" Some of the other students giggled. Jake had made the mistake of mentioning his service record during the first week of class. Nobody had believed him then, and they believed him even less now. "I was just saying that peace treaties don't mean much if one side decides to break them," Jake said. "And you know this because you're secretly a space marine?" Brad asked with a grin. Jake stood up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. Every eye in the room was on him now. He could feel his heart beating faster. His therapist had warned him about moments like this. Stress could trigger flashbacks. He needed to stay calm. "Excuse me," Jake said. "I need some air." He walked quickly toward the door. Behind him, he could hear Brad making more jokes. Amy was probably rolling her eyes. Professor Grant was probably wondering if she should call security. Jake made it to the hallway. Before the emergency broadcast began, the screens mounted on the walls flickered to life. A news anchor with a serious expression appeared. Her voice was calm, but Jake could see the fear in her eyes. "We interrupt regular programming for an emergency bulletin. Long-range sensors have detected multiple ships approaching Earth from deep space. Military officials confirm that these vessels match Zephyrian design patterns." Jake stopped walking. His blood turned to ice. The approaching fleet appears to be significantly larger than any force encountered during the previous conflict. Military sources estimate the arrival time at approximately 72 hours. All civilian populations are advised to remain calm and await further instructions. Students were pouring out of classrooms now. Jake heard screaming from down the hall. Someone was crying. Phones were ringing everywhere as people tried to call their families. Jake walked back toward his classroom like a man in a dream. This couldn't be happening. The war was over. The Zephyrians were supposed to be gone. They had barely survived the first time. Earth's defenses were weaker now, not stronger. Inside the classroom, chaos had erupted. Professor Grant was trying to answer questions she didn't know the answers to. Students were panicking, calling their parents, asking what they should do. Brad Collins was sitting at his desk looking pale and shaken. All his jokes about fake military stories didn't seem so funny anymore. When he saw Jake come back into the room, his expression changed. "Jake," Brad said in a shaky voice, "you ... You really were in the military, weren't you?" Jake looked at the terrified young man who had spent weeks mocking him. Brad's hands were trembling. His confident smile was completely gone. "Yes," Jake said simply. "You fought them before?" "Yes." Amy Chun pushed through the crowd of panicked students. Her face was white with fear. "Jake, is it true? Did you really fight the Zephyrians?" Jake nodded. Around the room, conversations stopped. Students who had been ignoring him for weeks were suddenly hanging on his every word. "What are they like?" Amy asked. "I mean, really like? Not the stuff in the textbooks." Jake looked at all the frightened faces staring at him. These people had spent weeks treating him like a liar and a fool. They had laughed at his service record. They had made jokes about his experiences. Now they wanted answers from him. "They're killers," Jake said quietly. "They don't negotiate. They don't show mercy. They don't take prisoners. When they decide to destroy something, they don't stop until it's gone. But we beat them before. Brad said desperately. The textbooks say we won. We got lucky, Jake replied. And we paid a terrible price for that luck. Most of the people who fought in that war didn't come home. Professor Grant stepped forward. Jake, if you have military experience, maybe you could help us understand what we're facing. Jake looked at her for a long moment. 3 weeks ago, she had doubted his credentials just like everyone else. Now she was asking for his help. What's coming isn't a war, Jake said. It's an extermination. They're not here to conquer us this time. They're here to make sure humans never embarrass them again. The room fell completely silent. Outside, air raid sirens had started wailing in the distance. Emergency vehicles were racing past the windows. Jake felt something change inside him. The quiet student who had been trying to forget the war was gone. In his place was the soldier who had stared into the void and refused to blink. But there's something the Zephyrians still don't understand about humans, Jake continued, his voice growing stronger. Something they didn't learn from the last war. What's that? Amy whispered. Jake looked around the room at all the scared faces, students who had been children when the war started, young people who had never faced real danger in their lives. They were about to learn what humanity was really capable of when pushed to the edge. They think we fight like they do, Jake said, with overwhelming force and superior technology. They don't understand that our greatest weapon isn't our ships or our guns. Then what is it? Brad asked. Jake smiled grimly. It's the fact that when everything goes wrong, when the odds are impossible, and when any sane species would give up, we get stubborn. Jake stood in the middle of the classroom while chaos erupted around him. Students were crying and calling their families. The emergency broadcast kept repeating the same terrible news. The Zephyrians were coming back with more ships than before, but something had changed in Jake. The quiet student who sat in the back corner was gone. In his place stood Lieutenant Jake Morrison, the man who had destroyed a Zephyrian dreadnought with nothing but a broken fighter and pure determination. Everyone needs to calm down, Jake said loudly. His voice cut through the panic. Students stopped crying and looked at him. There was something different about the way he stood now. His shoulders were straight. His eyes were sharp and focused. He looked like a soldier. Professor Grant, Jake said, I need you to contact the university's military research department. Tell them Lieutenant Jake Morrison needs to speak with them immediately. Professor Grant stared at him. Jake, I don't understand. How do you know about the research department? Because I helped design some of their defensive systems during the last war, Jake replied. Amy, I need you to access the college's computer network. Pull up all the astronomical data from the past month. Look for anything unusual in the outer system. Amy wiped tears from her eyes. Jake, I'm just a biology student. I don't know how to do that kind of research. Yes, you do, Jake said firmly. You've been studying alien biology for months. You understand how their ships work better than you realize. Their vessels are part organic, part machine. That makes them predictable. Brad Collins stood up slowly. His face was still pale, but he looked determined. Jake, what can I do? I want to help. Jake looked at the young man who had spent weeks calling him a liar. You're an engineering student, right? Yes. Good. I need you to help me figure out how to turn civilian satellites into communication relays. The military's command network is going to be the first thing the Zephyrians target. Within minutes, Jake had transformed the classroom into an impromptu war room. Students who had been panicking were now working with purpose. Professor Grant was making phone calls to military contacts she didn't even know she had. Amy was pulling up star charts and sensor data on her laptop. Brad was sketching satellite modification plans on the whiteboard. How do you know all this? Amy asked as she worked. I mean, really know it? Jake pulled off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves. For the first time since starting college, he let everyone see his prosthetic arm. The metal fingers moved smoothly as he gestured at the pause. Data on Amy's screen. Because I was there when Admiral Carson broke the Zephyrian fleet codes at Kepler 442b, Jake said. I was in the fighter squadron that held them off while our techs figured out their command frequencies. I watched my friends die buying us time. To crack their systems, the room went completely quiet. Students stared at Jake's artificial arm and finally understood that everything he had told them was true. I lost this arm ramming my fighter into the side of their flagship, Jake continued. The explosion took out their main guns and gave our fleet the opening they needed. 37 of my squadron mates died in that battle. I was the only one who made it home. Professor Grant hung up her phone. Jake, I just spoke with General Hayes at the research facility. She wants to talk to you immediately. She says your service record is classified at the highest levels. Of course it is, Jake said. Most of what happened during the war is still secret. The government doesn't want people to know how close we came to losing everything. Brad looked up from his vez. Calculations. Jake, if you're really a war hero, why didn't you tell us? Why let us make fun of you for weeks? Jake sat down heavily in a chair. For a moment, the soldier facade slipped away. He looked tired and sad. Because I came here to forget, he said quietly. I wanted to be normal. I wanted to study and make friends and pretend the war never happened. I thought if I could just be a regular student, maybe the nightmares would stop. Amy reached out and touched his metal hand. I'm sorry we didn't believe you. You couldn't have known, Jake replied. And honestly, I hoped you'd never have to find out. I hoped the war was really over and you could all live normal lives without ever seeing what's out there in the dark. The phone rang. Professor Grant answered it and then handed it to Jake. It's General Hayes. Jake took the phone. General, this is Lieutenant Morrison. Jake, thank God you're alive, came the voice on the other end. We need you at the command center immediately. The situation is worse than we're telling the public. How much worse? Their fleet is 3 times larger than anything we faced before, and they're not coming to conquer us this time. Intelligence intercepts confirm they're here for total extermination. They want to make sure humanity never threatens them again. Jake closed his eyes. What's our defensive capability? Minimal. After the war ended, budget cuts reduced our orbital platforms by 60%. Most of our experienced officers retired or transferred to civilian jobs. We have maybe 24 combat-ready ships. Against how many? Over 300. The students in the room were listening to every word. Their faces grew more frightened with each detail. General, I'm going to need some equipment, Jake said. And I'm going to need clearance to coordinate with civilian resources, whatever you need. I also need you to trust me when I tell you that some college students are going to be crucial. To our defense, there was a pause. College students? Jake looked around the room at Amy, Brad, Professor Grant, and all the others who had gone from mocking him to following his orders in the space of an hour. These people have skills we need, Jake said. And more importantly, they have something the Zephyrians still don't understand about humans. What's that? They refuse to give up, even when they should. Jake hung up the phone and stood up. The weight of command settled on his shoulders like an old coat. He had hoped never to wear it again, but the choice was no longer his. Listen. Carefully, he said to the room. In about 60 hours, this planet is going to be under attack by an enemy that wants every human being dead. Our military is outnumbered 10-1. Our defenses are inadequate. By every reasonable measure, we're going to lose. The students stared at him with terrified eyes. But there's something I learned during the last war, Jake continued. The Zephyrians are stronger than us. They're faster than us. They have better technology and more ships. But they have one critical weakness. What? Brad asked. Jake smiled grimly. They think logically. They make plans based on reasonable assumptions. They expect their enemies to behave rationally. And we don't? Amy asked. When pushed to the wall, humans don't behave rationally at all, Jake replied. We do things that make no sense. We take risks that should get us killed. We refuse to surrender, even when surrender is the smart choice. He walked to the window and looked up at the sky where death was approaching from the stars. The Zephyrians are about to learn something they should have figured out during the last war, Jake said. When you threaten everything a human cares about, you don't get a frightened animal that runs away. You get something much more dangerous. What? Professor Grant asked. You get a human with nothing left to lose. The next 48 hours changed everything. Riverside Community College became the most unlikely military command center in human history. Jake had turned the cafeteria into a communications hub. The library became a strategy room. Even the gymnasium was filled with volunteers learning how to operate emergency equipment. General Hayes had arrived with a small team of military advisors. She was a tall woman with gray hair and tired eyes. She looked at Jake's operation with amazement. Lieutenant, I have to admit I was skeptical when you said college students could help us fight this war, she said. But what you've accomplished here is remarkable. Jake was standing at a table covered with maps and computer screens. Amy Chun was beside him, explaining the weak points she had discovered in Zephyrian ship design. Brad Collins was coordinating with civilian pilots who had volunteered to fly converted cargo ships against the alien fleet. These people understand something our military forgot, Jake replied. When you're fighting for your home, every advantage matters, even small ones. Amy looked up from her research. Jake, I've found something important. The new Zephyrian ships have organic components that need constant chemical balance. If we can disrupt their biological systems, their technology will fail. How do we do that? General Hayes asked. The same way we did it last time, Jake said. We get close enough to inject a virus into their network. But this time, we're going to need a lot more ships to carry the attack. Brad walked over with a tablet full of data. Jake, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is we've converted over 200 civilian craft into attack ships. Cargo haulers, racing ships, even some old passenger shuttles. What's the bad news? Most of the pilots have never been in combat. They're farmers, delivery drivers, racing enthusiasts. They're brave, but they don't know how to fight in space. Jake nodded. He had expected this problem. That's actually an advantage. How? Is that an advantage? General Hayes asked. Because the Zephyrians will expect us to fight like a military, Jake explained. They'll predict standard attack formations and defensive maneuvers. But these civilian pilots don't know the rules. They'll do things that make no tactical sense. Professor Grant approached the group. She had been coordinating with universities around the world, sharing Jake's defensive strategies. Jake, we're getting reports from other cities. Everyone wants to help, but they're asking the same question. How can civilians possibly make a difference against aliens with superior technology? Jake looked around the room at all the people working frantically to prepare Earth's defense. Students who should have been studying for tests were learning to operate military communications equipment. Teachers who should have been grading papers were helping coordinate supply lines. None of them were soldiers, but all of them were determined to fight. Tell them what I learned during the last war, Jake said. The Zephyrians think war is about having the biggest guns and the fastest ships. They don't understand that war is really about will, about refusing to quit when quitting makes sense. The warning sirens began wailing. Jake looked at his watch. The alien fleet had arrived early. Attention all personnel, came the announcement over the intercom. Zephyrian ships have been detected entering Earth's atmosphere. All civilian populations should seek shelter immediately. Through the windows, Jake could see dark shapes descending from the sky. The Zephyrian fleet was massive. Hundreds of organic-looking ships that moved like living creatures. They blotted out the sun as they took positions around the planet. "My God," General Hayes whispered. "There are so many of them." Jake felt the familiar calm that came over him during combat. His heart rate slowed. His breathing became steady. This was the moment he had been preparing for his entire adult life. "All civilian pilots, this is Lieutenant Morrison," Jake said into his communication device. "The enemy has arrived. Remember what we practiced. Don't try to fight like military pilots. Trust your instincts. Do whatever feels right, even if it seems crazy." "Jake," Amy said, grabbing his arm. "The biological virus we developed. Are you sure it will work?" "It worked before," Jake replied. "But this time we need to get it into multiple ships simultaneously. If even one command vessel survives, they can adapt their defenses." Brad was monitoring the tactical displays. "Jake, our converted ships are launching now. 237 civilian craft against over 300 alien warships." The battle began immediately. Jake watched on the screens as civilian pilots and converted cargo haulers charged directly at alien dreadnoughts. A racing pilot named Pete Davis flew his modified ship through a formation of Zephyrian fighters, spinning and weaving in patterns that confused their targeting systems. A delivery driver called Sarah Kim used her knowledge of asteroid navigation to hide her ship inside the debris field around Earth's moon. "They're not fighting like any military I've ever seen," General Hayes said with amazement. "That's the point," Jake replied. "Watch what happens when the aliens try to predict their movements." On the screens, they could see Zephyrian ships firing at empty space where military doctrine said the human ships should be. But the civilian pilots weren't following military doctrine. They were flying like they were late for deliveries, or trying to win races, or avoiding traffic accidents. Amy was tracking the biological weapon deployment. "Jake, we've successfully infected 40% of their fleet. The virus is spreading through their organic networks. It's working," Brad shouted. "Look at that." Across the battle zone, Zephyrian ships were beginning to malfunction. Their organic components were failing as the human-designed virus attacked their biological systems. Ships that had seemed invincible moments before were now drifting helplessly in space, but the fight was far from over. Even with their technology failing, the aliens still outnumbered the humans. Jake watched as brave civilian pilots sacrificed themselves to protect Earth. Pete Davis rammed his ship into a Zephyrian cruiser to stop it from bombarding New York. Sarah Kim used her cargo hauler to shield a school ship full of evacuating children. "We're losing too many people," General Hayes said grimly. Jake activated his communicator again. "All pilots, listen to me. I know you're scared. I know this seems impossible. But remember why you're fighting. Every one of those alien ships wants to destroy your families, your friends, your world. They think humans will give up when the cost gets too high." He paused, watching another brave pilot sacrifice everything to save others. "Show them they're wrong," Jake continued. "Show them that humans don't quit. Show them that when you threaten everything we care about, we become something they can't understand or defeat." The tide of battle began to turn. Inspired by Jake's words and the sacrifice of their fallen comrades, the surviving civilian pilots fought with desperate courage. They used tactics no military academy would ever teach. They took risks that should have gotten them killed. They refused to retreat, even when retreat was the only logical choice. By the end of 14 hours, the Zephyrian fleet was destroyed or fleeing. Earth's sky was filled with the wreckage of alien ships. The cost had been terrible. Over half the civilian volunteers hadn't made it home. But humanity had survived. Jake stood in the ruins of what had once been his quiet college classroom. Amy was beside him, exhausted but smiling. Brad was coordinating rescue efforts for the surviving pilots. Professor Grant was already planning how to teach future students about what had really happened here. "We did it," Amy said quietly. "We actually Beat them again. Jake nodded, but his expression was sad. At a price, too many good people died today. But they died protecting everything they loved, Brad said, walking over to join them. They died proving that humans won't give up, no matter what. Jake looked out the window at the burning alien wreckage falling like stars. The Zephyrians came here thinking they would find a broken species. Instead, they found something they still don't understand. What's that? Professor Grant asked. They found humans being human, Jake replied. Stubborn, brave, and too stupid to know when. They're beaten. General Hayes approached the group. Lieutenant Morrison, the president wants to speak with you. The whole world wants to thank you for what you've done. Jake shook his head. I didn't do this alone, General. These people did it. Amy figured out how to defeat their technology. Brad organized our civilian fleet. Professor Grant coordinated our communications. Every person who flew today did it because they refused to let their world die. He looked around at his former classmates, the people who had once mocked his war stories. That's what the aliens will never understand about us, Jake said. We're not stronger than them. We're not smarter than them. But when everything we care about is threatened, we become something they can't calculate or predict. Amy smiled. We become human. Exactly, Jake replied. And apparently that's enough.